Okay, we are in season 2, episode 2 of Invincible. And like I said last week, I have read the comics. So pretty much everything that they are going to be touching on, I kind of know what's coming. But I will say one thing that this episode made me remember is because the end of the first season was like ended on such a dark note with him and his dad fighting and like almost being killed by his dad and all of the death and destruction that came out from that, and because the season 2 is like dealing with the immediate aftermath of it and all of the trauma people are going through and how they're trying to pick up the pieces afterward, that I actually kind of forgot until this episode reminded me how fucking funny this show is. There is so much goofiness in the Invincible universe, and I really appreciate this episode really brings it in. We aren't really seeing too much of the multiversal villain, whose name escapes me for just a brief moment. We're dealing more with, going back to the day-to-day stuff that Invincible deals with the goofy little one-off villains and everything. Doc Seismic, who we saw last season, who was messing up the Mount Rushmore, he shows up at the Washington Monument here, and he has witty banter with Invincible while Invincible mocks some of the things that he's saying, where Doc Seismic's like, you stole materials from the earth to build this Washington Monument, and then Invincible's like, isn't that like all buildings though? So there's just a lot of silliness that I really appreciate. And it's kind of like, I wouldn't say it's as much of a whiplash in terms of mood as like BoJack Horseman is, where BoJack Horseman goes between like sitcom hijinks to existential depression and ennui and like people doing horrible things that just destroy your soul. Invincible is still very much in a comic book universe with comic book logic and the comic book silliness that's in there, while dealing with darker themes and more realistic consequences of the actions of superhero stuff. And Adam Eve, this episode is actually dealing with a lot of that, because with her powers, she doesn't want to be a superhero anymore, right? She wants to she doesn't want to fight crime. What she wants to do is use her powers to help people. And since Chicago was damaged heavily when Omni-Man and Invincible fought, she's like, I'm going to Chicago and I'm going to help build things. But she gets yelled at by a construction crew because she just goes and puts up a bunch of stuff, and they're like, do you even know if that's to code? But then, a local mother thanks her for her work. She's like, no, we've been waiting for, I've been waiting for months to get back into my house, and you just put it all back together. And there's this lot right near my place that they haven't done anything to clean up in 6 years. And Eve just goes and turns it into a park just like that. But then we find out that lot was unstable, and there's a reason they hadn't done anything with it, and she hadn't checked the code on that, and somebody could have been injured because there was a sinkhole there. Fortunately, no one was injured, but she has to deal with the ramifications of, just because you have the power to do things doesn't mean you can necessarily always just ignore all the red tape. Sometimes there are more complex solutions to problems. Sure, you can just magic your hands and put together a building, but do you know if you built that building to code so that it will stand up long term? You're a superhero, not an architect. There's concerns there. And Invincible himself, ever since his fight with Nolan, he has not been feeling very confident in himself. He doesn't want to do the superheroing thing by himself. That's why he has been so eager to work for Cecil, because Cecil's an interesting character. He's a very Nick Fury character, but he's a very pragmatic G-man. He does amoral government things, but he seems to have a strong moral sense in terms of the big picture. And so while he might say go and capture monsters and turn them into weapons to use on something, oftentimes there's okay, well, that actually helped save the day here. And so I always really liked the character of Cecil in the comics. I like how he's portrayed here. As somebody who's very leftish in my politics and very anarchist sympathetic, even though I wouldn't necessarily call myself an anarchist, it does feel weird to see this character who's just the absolute antithesis to anarchic ways of thought, that he is portrayed so sympathetically, but I think he's written really well. And I really like to see how they handle Cecil's character in the show. Overall, I think the show has handled the source material very well, and in some cases better than the source material itself did, because, you know, like Nimona. The movie Nimona was based on a webcomic turned comic book called Nimona, and after I saw the movie Nimona, I went and read the comic book, and I could tell ways as I was reading Nimona. I'm like, okay, well, the story is still being fleshed out as it's being written in the comic, versus in the film, you have a far more cohesive whole, and you figured out how to plot and pace everything that way. And Invincible is basically the same way. Robert Kirkman, who wrote the comic, he is, you know, one of the executive producers on the show. He's one of the writers on the show. And so while the core of it is very faithful to the comics, they're able to rearrange things and pace things better so that it tells a better multi-threaded, multi-layered, well-paced story, I would say. And this episode was definitely more on the goofy end of things. We've got payoff on the first season episode where they went to Mars and had to deal with Martians, and then it turns out one of the Martians had replaced one of the astronauts when they went back. We find out about that guy's whole thing, and he's a really silly character he really just wanted to get away from Mars, and he's just trying to do his best to play a human, but he's really bad at playing a human. But like he gets fired from NASA because obviously he's no good at pretending to be an astronaut. He's just a Martian without any like specific training to be a human astronaut. But then he realizes that there had been a Martian on Earth who was a superhero, who was a member of the Guardians of the Globe, and he decides, oh, well, maybe I can go and do superheroing thing. He gives his origin story. He's like, I was just a normal human person born on Earth, and I got my powers from a generic industrial accident. And he calls himself the Shapesmith, because as a Martian he can change shape, and he's a very silly character, and I think they captured him from the comics pretty accurately. So I'm really enjoying this season. I really like this show, and I look forward to seeing where we're going in the arc this season. Hey, thanks for watching. I'm trying to get my channel monetized, so your view means a lot. Don't forget to toss me a like, and subscribe, and ring the bell. I stream Mondays and Fridays at 5 p.m. and Sundays at 2 p.m., so catch me live and join in on the convo. You can find all my socials in the description below, and thank you to all my patrons, with a very special shout out to my Whale Shark tier patron Ryan D, and my Anemone Friends tier patron Piftle Cakes. Your support means the world. Catch you next time.